Hey guys, it is June 3rd and we have ourselves a pretty big balance update. I'm expecting some changes from Cassia, Tracer, Tassadar, stuff like that. While I've already gone over a lot of these, there are some that I'm excited about, some that I wanted to reread a couple times. So with that being said, we're going to get into it. As always, on balance updates, my goal is to get these out as soon as possible, so I have not tested any of these changes. However, I do make a prediction on whether or not this is going to affect the meta and how much it'll affect the meta. Is it going to make this hero something that we see every single game, or is it going to be something very small that will likely not make a major difference to the hero? Either way, let's get into it. The first thing that they do is they change the call for help balance, which means that the tower's forts and keep damage to enemy heroes has been reduced by 10%, and the maximum armor reduction of structures has been reduced from 40 to 20%. This is a significant difference as far as reducing the impact of this. One of the teams I was coaching, I pretty much told them to grab the objective, go in a different lane, and push the other lane because it's not worth defending against a full team. So the full team defends against the objective while you take an entire fort on your own. I think we're closing back in similarly to what we had before, and it's still worth pushing with objectives. I would say early objectives maybe might still be worth just immediately separating from and getting value in other lanes, but later objectives, this is definitely where your tank can use some of those later talents to start being a little bit more aggressive with some of this stuff. On to the heroes. We have 3 tank changes, 1 support change. We've got a bunch of healer changes, melee, and some range changes. Let's get into it. Anub'arak, Hardened Carapace. His W, which is the shield that he can apply to only himself, is being increased from 315 to 340, and then level 7 Leeching Scarab's bonus attack damage is being increased from 20 to 30%. Remember that this talent is also tied to a healing amount that you get from the damage that your scarabs do, so the more damage they do means the more that you get healed. Now, the downside about this talent is Anub'arak usually dies from burst. If your shield goes down, you lose your spell armor, you die in a very short amount of time. Anub'arak, if he gets a little bit of health buffs, he tends to be a meta tank that's used in so many games. He gets a couple health nerfs, and he's just unplayable. And that's kind of where the back and forth goes with him, is they want to try to find a way to balance him without actually doing that. So I think what they're trying to do is have his W prevent the burst and have this prevent the sustained damage. Will it actually work? I don't know, but it's worth a shot. I ultimately don't think this is going to make a huge change in the meta, but I think it's a step in the right direction to at least seeing if this will work. Stitches is getting an increase to health. He was already the highest health hero in the game after the health nerfs on Deathwing, putting him even further in the lead. And he's also gaining some health regen to compensate for that. Chop Chop is a level 4 talent that gave him attack speed. They've just adjusted its functionality, so now it gives 25 if you hit him on the end, and it gives 50 if they're hit on the middle portion of it, of your slam, giving you some attack speed. It synergizes really well with a talent that makes it to where when you hit someone, you gain health back. Because now you hit really fast and you gain a lot of your health back, especially because it's percent health, which means with this new health increase, that talent may have just gotten a little bit better, that build may have just gotten a little bit better. It's something that we may want to look into just a teeny bit more, and I think it'll be pretty cool. And it is also important to mention that Devour heals you based on percent health, so the higher health that you have, the more you are going to be healing from all of those talents as well. Tyrael is getting a change that I personally think is going to lead the solo build that I've been trying to make over and over and over. I think it's going to lead this to be just almost good enough to be used at a decent amount. So, his Salvation W talent is being increased. That's a personal shield increase. Then his Divine Vigor, which is a talent that when you use your Smite on someone, which is your E, it will increase, or it will make it to where you heal on your next few auto attacks. I believe it's the next 4 seconds of auto attacks. Then level 7, if you hit someone with your E, the next, again, few auto attacks to that target do increased attack damage bonus. Except for it's not just to that target. It's for each person that you hit with your E. So if you hit 2 people, it used to increase your damage by 110% for your auto attacks. Now it's 60%. So if you hit 2 people, it's 120%. Increased damage with your auto attacks. Tyrael's auto attacks are not the highest auto attacks, but the fact that he gets so much mobility while he's doing that he can pretty much stick with just about anyone and drop them relatively quickly. So I had theorized a solo lane build on Tyrael where you charge in their backline with something like a Judgment or a Q, you hit E on their backline, hit 2 to 3 people, get increase in damage, and you out heal the damage while they're trying to kill you by this extra healing from Divine Vigor, and you take out one backliner, then use your Q to jump away. Kind of like an Illidan playstyle where you hunt in, you hit someone, you try to kill them, and then you jump away. You'd be running the same playstyle, but instead of Illidan, you get to run Tyrael. What are the benefits of running each? Tyrael's a little bit tankier, he can survive burst a little bit better, and he's a little bit more mobile for escapes. But the downside is that, or at least the upside for Illidan, is that Hunt is global, while Judgment is not. But they have a very similar playstyle, and with some of these buffs, I feel like it's getting a little bit closer to Tyrael outshining Illidan, because they'll be able to do a very similar thing here. So I would say definitely give it a shot. The map I found it was the best on was Battlefield of Eternity, because the downside about throwing Tyrael in the solo lane is he has really bad wave clear, and so you need to ask, what's a map that you gain value by having a solo laner that doesn't win every matchup, but also can't double soak? And so it eliminates a lot of maps, but this might even get him closer to winning a lot of the matchups. 75% increased healing is not bad, and it might actually keep you in there. So I don't know if he'll win any of the matchups, but I do think that this is a solid solo lane hero for Battlefield of Eternity. On to the Lost Vikings. This is a mini rework, and it's quite a rework. And in fact, I do want to bring up really quick the Lost Vikings, and we're going to go with talents. And I want to pull up their old talents really quick so we can see what they had before and what they are getting. So Olaf the Stout, every 5 seconds you gain physical armor. There's 2 charges, so there's just block charges, right? Now it's going to be block charges plus Olaf has 20% more health. Spy games. After standing still for 3 seconds, Eric gains stealth, a slight radius increase, and then the stealth persists for 3 seconds after moving. Now, you're also going to gain 75 basic attack damage for 6 seconds. Because he attacks multiple times per second, that means you're going to get more than 6 auto attacks at 75% increased damage, as well as you're going to be coming out of stealth. Then we also have Bribe. Bribe used to make it to where the camps would respawn 50% faster, and they're removing that functionality. That's not necessarily a buff or a nerf, because if you use it on an opposing camp, you don't want it to respawn faster. And if you use it on one of your camps, you do want it to respawn faster. But Bribe, you generally want to try to steal an enemy camp if you can, which means that removing that 50% faster is going to be better in most situations, but it's going to be worse in a situation where you just wanted to keep getting your siege camp every time that it's up, and repeatedly get your siege camp up often. That strategy was used a lot with Merklord, where you would constantly get a siege camp in a lane that's on the opposite side of where you're fighting over something, and you'd be constantly buffing its damage by 50%. However, with all of that, I wouldn't consider this a buff or a nerf. I would just consider it a change. We also have Balog the Fierce. I won't look at its old thing because it's got a new one. Increases Balog's attack range by 2.5. While he is near Olaf and Eric, he becomes inspired and gains 50% attack speed. This is going to do one of the things that I mentioned, as I gave 2 possible rework ideas for the Lost Vikings. I actually sent these into Blizzard a long time ago. One idea was that each of the Vikings had an aura. Balog had an attack speed aura, Olaf had an armor aura, and then Eric had a healing aura. And you would put them in the groups with the teams that need those auras the most, and then when you grouped up, the auras would double in size, so that you could cover your entire team with all 3 auras. And then you can balance them based off of that. Because the one downside about the Vikings is that you would normally do the Vikings to get soak in 3 different lanes, and then when you reach late game, they were just rather weak, right? So your goal was to get to level 20 by increasing the amount of soak your team gets. You would get 20 before the enemy team, and you would try to close out the game before they got level 20. But I was like, how about we nerf their soaking ability, or make it more difficult on them, and then give them a little bit more potential in the late game, so there's more counterplay to them, but there's also more that you can do with them. And they didn't go with the aura idea, and specifically, I got a response back from a Blizzard employee that said, auras are boring, which I thought was funny. But it was a more detailed response than that, but I'll paraphrase it as auras are boring. And he said, not interactive, I guess, but that's okay. And plus, I'm not a game designer. What do I know about ideas? Anyway, so they still decided to go with the method of when they come together, they will get extra bonuses, or at least there's talents that you can take for that. So let's put that in here and let's talk about it. So Balog having increased auto attack. Remember, Balog is the one that does AoE. So having increased attack range as well as attack speed can be rather devastating in a team fight. But they're also increasing spin to wins potential in a team fight. Reducing spin to wins damage from 101 to 85. However, they're doubling the damage against heroes. Remember that spin to win also can stack. You get 3 things around one hero and you spin with all of them, and suddenly you're going to be doing 85 times 6, which can be a very high amount of burst damage. So you could either go for a high sustained AoE, or you can go for a high burst AoE if you group up everyone closing in the late game, or even earlier. We also have Longboat Raid, which is getting some health increase and a bonus for each Viking that is going to be there when you pop the Longboat. Play Again's getting a little bit of a nerf. Then we have Nordic Attack Squad. So what Nordic Attack Squad used to do was you activate it. It has a 20-second cooldown, and for 5 seconds, all of your Vikings do 1.25% of the hero's maximum health. Well, now, while Olaf, Balog, and Eric are near each other, it's baseline. It's just going to be there. Not baseline, but it's just passive. It's going to be there. You won't need to activate it. You won't need to do anything. It's just there. So it'll be for really long fights where you need to do a lot of maximum health. And remember, we could have that AoE splash damage going on throughout that entire time. So what is this going to do for the Vikings? Well, recently we've been seeing some really good Vikings players using Vikings on maps like Braxis Holdout, as well as Dragonshire, to kind of do a little bit of what Rhaegar does, where you have one person holding the point, one person pushing the lane, and there's no way to answer both at the same time, because if you go to the point, the lane is pushed in and you lose soak. If you go to the lane, you never take back the point, creating kind of this never-ending process, to the point that it's actually been able to sort of counter Rhaegar, because the Vikings can play a little bit more aggressive against Rhaegar, while Olaf and Misha do about the same amount of damage and healing to themselves, so they could hold the points together. And it made the Lost Vikings rather devastating, although much more difficult to play. Once again, still having that problem of once you hit the late game, they rather struggle. But now in the late game, with a couple talent changes, you have the potential to do 50% more attack speed with a long range, doing 1.25% of maximum health of all the enemy heroes at the same time. There are a lot of potential plays now that you can do with the Vikings, and I do think that for the people that are willing to learn them, they will be a top tier hero on very specific maps. Still the AoE map, or the big maps, but also potentially on these maps like Braxis and Dragonshire if you're really good at them. They are, in my opinion, one of the most difficult heroes, if not the most difficult hero in the game to learn, so make sure to practice them a lot before you take them into a game. On to healers. Morales is just getting buffs to underutilized talents. I never really took any of these talents that much. I took Metadrone a couple times in ARAMs when you just needed to heal multiple people. It's a decent buff, but I don't think any of these are going to really change the meta. I always thought First Responder was a little underrated, and seeing that it's getting a bit of a buff is nice, but in the higher ranks, you're going to need that extra range so you don't get jumped on. So none of these talents are really going to change anything for Morales, other than if you want just a little bit more impact if you guys are already winning, or if you already have a lot of value. Rhaegar, he's been kind of dominating with Bloodlust, and this is a really cool upgrade to Ancestral. I never really thought Ancestral's upgrade was any good. The AoE healing, usually the person I'm saving with Ancestral is too far away from my team, so the AoE healing never really got value unless you tried to like force it. Like you throw out your Ancestral and everyone jumps in to get the heal, which is very rare and it almost never happened. So now they're making it to where after 1.5 seconds, Ancestral healing casts a second time on the same target. Most of the time the first Ancestral healing is enough to save the target, but if it's someone really out of position and the enemy team is really focusing, this is pretty big. But now it also gives a second proc, and it still heals allies near the area for a low amount, but it does scale. But it can heal everyone twice. Well, now you can save someone once, and then when they come back, your team has 1.5 seconds to surround them for that second heal, and it's going to be much more valuable. Does it beat Bloodlust? I don't know, but it certainly makes your level 20 on Ancestral just a little bit more worth picking. Tyrande. All of her level 1 and level 4 talents have shifted. Now, this has been the way that they've balanced Tyrande a few times, and it's actually worked really well. You would think that changing, moving talents around wouldn't affect that much, but surprisingly, it does, especially for a hero like Tyrande, where she has a lot of value in the early game, and she hits very specific power spikes to make her worth it. In this particular case, they're moving Ranger, Lunar Blaze, and True Shot Aura to level 1. Lunar Blaze being able to start her quest off a little bit earlier is going to significantly increase the value of that particular talent. Especially since I find anyways, I land a lot of stuns from level 1 to level 4, and then once I hit level 4, I feel like the enemy team's playing a little bit safer. I usually end off games on Tyrande, even though my win rate's rather high, with only about 10 to 14 stacks. So being able to get probably about 4 to 5 more stacks before we hit level 4 is a pretty significant difference, especially since that stacks up its damage relatively easily. Then we go into level 4. Now, they have increased the bonus healing of one of the talents they've moved up to level 4, and in my opinion, it's closing in a little bit closer to taking that talent over Lune's Chosen unless you have a particular diver. Being able to heal one person for the normal amount, and then the next person for almost the amount of 2 full heals, is going to make this talent really good. Not just that, but you're also going to be able to decrease the cooldown of your Q, which is going to significantly increase the value of this talent as well, making Lune's Chosen even lower on the list, in my honest opinion. Mark of Mending is still pretty good if you've got like a diva that attacks rather quickly and you can pick a target that the diva's naturally going to hit, but overall I wouldn't recommend it outside of some very cheesy compositions. They are also making it to where this is no longer an activatable. It is just always going to pierce the first enemy hero hit with the Ranger talent. And then on level 7, they've adjusted the functionality of Huntress's Fury. Basic attacks only splash to nearby heroes. Basic attacks that splash from the Huntress Fury gives cooldown reduction on Light of a Loon, so you can get your heal cooldown a little bit faster. Now, this, I don't really like this change. It competes with a lot of really powerful talents, and the thing that really bothers me about this is I liked when they changed it to be this because then you had wave clear. There's not a lot of healers that have wave clear. You could use your trait on a middle minion and then you could auto attack. It hits all the minions and you just kill the whole wave. And she's back to not having wave clear, and this talent competes with things that give you better healing. So I think that this talent's not going to do anything for the meta, and it's just going to be rather bad. Darnasian Archery has gotten another change. It no longer resets when you're attacking non-heroes, but it still only stacks while you're attacking heroes. So you could quickly attack like a fort a couple times, then go back to a hero. They did drop the duration amount, but I think this is pretty reasonable because you attack a couple times per second anyways. So that's pretty reasonable. It could make this talent still a great option to take on 16 if you just need that extra little bit of damage. But generally on 16, you're going to want to take some other talents because there are some very good talents on that tier. One, for example, is a cleanse, and the other one is a 10% health that you can drop on pretty much any tank. I believe it's 10%, might be like 5%. I don't know. It's a lot of damage for a tank. Especially coming out from a healer. So overall, will this make a major difference in Tyrande? I would say we're closing in on that point. Losing the cleanse and having it so late is really bad in competitive, but in competitive, she was one of the better healers. In fact, by the end of HGC, she was picked in nearly every other game that was played because of her high potential to follow up nearly anything that a tank would do, and whatever she followed up with would always get lowered armor, so it had a higher chance of dying. I feel like in the coordinated environment, her and Deckard are still some of the best healers that exist, but outside of coordinated, she couldn't really keep up with the healing, so I think that she's in a pretty rough spot. I think Everlasting Light's going to make that a little bit better, but at the same time, it still requires you to auto attack, which means it's still a little bit more feast and famine than I would like out of a healer. However, I do really like this change, and I think that it will be very good for her. Uther is only getting level 20 changes. We have Bulwark of Light, adjusted functionality. Divine Shield is also applied to all nearby heroes near its initial target and lasts 1 second longer. Again, they keep buffing this talent, and we keep learning that the person that you're Divine Shielding is usually pretty far away from your team. So without using this as a... I mean, now this is going to be essentially a sanctification if your team's I mean, coordinated enough to make it work. And then armor amounts being increased from this as well. Ultimately, same thing. It's competing with one of the best talents, being able to come back to life after having an amazing heal. Because when you die, you have the best healing potential on Uther. So you're effectively popping an ult to get an amazing healing, and they have to waste their entire resources to kill you, and then you come back after keeping up your entire team. It's really hard to compete with Redemption, so I don't think that this is going to make a major difference for Uther. Whitemane, Righteous Flame, has a new functionality, no longer has the old functionality, increases the damage of Searing Lash by 25%. If the second strike of Searing Lash hits an enemy hero, the bonus is increased to 50%, and grants Whitemane 25% increased attack speed. Saintly Greatstaff was moved from level 13. Scarlet Wrath was moved from level 7. I'm going to pull up Whitemane talents because I am unfamiliar with all of these names. So let's take a peek at what they've done. So Righteous Flame used to do 25% more damage to enemies. It was increased to 50% if they were slowed, rooted, silenced. And in this case, now it's going to do that bonus as long as a second strike hits an enemy hero, and it's going to give you attack speed, making this the talent you take in the attack speed build. Then we also have Saintly Greatstaff, which was a level 13 talent. Enemies hit by Searing Lash are marked for 3 seconds. Basic attacks against them deal 55 spell damage and then remove the mark. So you trigger it once, removes the mark. It really wasn't a very good 13 talent, and it competed with some more impactful talents on those tiers. And then Scarlet Wrath is being moved from 7 to level 13, which this would increase the duration of your Zeal by 0.5 seconds. It was very close to keeping Zeal going at all times. So you'd throw a heal on a couple different people and you would auto attack, becoming one of the highest sustained healers in the game if you were not CC'd. Additional functionality, basic attacks against enemies reduce Zeal's cooldown by 1 second. Again, Zeal's cooldown. Zeal is just the trait. This is the second time that they've done this. I think they mean the Q cooldown. Or the E cooldown. I'm not sure. Z is just your trait. Unless they're meaning the activatable that increases your spell damage. But that wouldn't benefit from the basic attacks. Well, I mean, like, that basic attack build doesn't want to increase spell damage, is what I'm saying. So, I don't like this change. It's going to ruin auto attack build. And then Radiance, additional functionality. If Zeal is cast while... Okay, Zeal... If Zeal is cast while Whitemane has 3 stacks of Desperation, then instead of reducing Whitemane's armor, it increases her armor. Yeah, so Zeal, it's going to lower the cooldown of your spell armor, or your spell damage and reduced armor. And instead increases her armor. So... Now, your Q talent at this level, which would heal a bunch of people, now gives you armor when you activate your trait, making you more tanky. That's not bad, but again, it competes with some more powerful talents. It either competes with a root, or it competes with the ability to reduce the damage of 2 different people by 50%. But the Q build used to be really powerful. I wish it removed the stacks of Desperation as well when it did this. Because if it removed the stacks of Desperation, then you could take this talent and you could lower... Wait, it's an additional functionality. So this doesn't change it. It just also does the trait thing. It could work. This is a weird change for Whitemane. I don't expect it to make huge differences, but it will buff her auto attack build a decent amount. And auto attack build would then use Radiance to give Q to everyone, and then you would give yourself armor. I think it could work. So, correction, this is a decent buff to the auto attack build. I'd be willing to try it again. Melee Assassins. Kira, her health is being increased. Fatal Wounds. Bonus damage to enemies below this has been reduced. Finishing Touch. Basic attack damage bonus increased. Basic attack damage bonus to enemies below this has been increased. Increasing her auto attack build value. Vipey should be happy about that. He runs that build quite a bit. Ensnaring Swing, primary target slow is being increased. Most of these are underutilized talents. The Unrelenting Strike cooldown, has been reduced to 60 seconds, mana cost is being reduced, and the final stun duration is being increased to 1.5 seconds. So it's more valuable if you can get it off. Higher risk, higher reward. Swing life away cooldowns being reduced, spell armor durations being increased. Silent Killer no longer silences the enemies on its initial cast additional functionality. Enemy heroes who are hit by it are silenced. So now you pop your R and you could just go through and silence everyone until the stun goes off. That's actually pretty good. You take the AoE stun on 16, follow it up by an ult, and you could actually do a very impactful ult at level 20, locking down an entire team with silence, followed up by a 1.5 second stun. That's pretty good. I would say that gives her a better shot in competitive, and with these auto attack changes for this, it gives her a much stronger chance in the solo lane, making her a decent, squishier solo laner, but I mean a little bit more health as well. I think she's a decent solo laner, and I think this could make a decent shot at putting her or bringing her into the meta. Zeratul, Gift of the Xel'Naga and Nexus Blades are removed. Nexus Blades, so the new talents that he's giving him: basic attacks against enemy heroes who are marked or slowed by Singularity Strike reduce the cooldown of Singularity Strike. And the other new talent is Shadow Stride, reducing the cooldown of Vorpal Blade by 10 seconds. And Vorpal Blade is his teleport that teleports the last person to be auto attacked. I don't think either of these talents are going to make a huge difference. As far as what you normally would take is Might of the Nerazim, you're going to upgrade your Might of the Nerazim. But if you're not going Might of the Nerazim, actually, that Gift of the Xel'Naga was your healing thing. Yeah, that's a huge nerf to Q build into Void Prison build, because neither of these talents are going to be good for Void Prison. That's a huge nerf to the late game Zeratul. Wow. Yeah, Twilight Falls and Shadow Mending. So they're leaving Twilight Falls in there, but they got rid of Shadow Mending. Wait, unless Shadow Mending's still in there. Hold up. So they didn't remove Shadow Mending. So what did they remove? They removed the upgrades, Gift to the Xel'Naga, and Nexus Blade. So they removed the Void Prison upgrade, where you're no longer affected by Void Prison, and then enemies are slowed. So yeah, so Shadow Mending's still in there. They're just adding 2 other talents. I don't think either of these talents are that good. Yeah. Vorpal Blade might be interesting, but this will do a lot more damage, but I don't think you need that damage. Because if you're going to do VP, your team's going to combo off of it. And if you're not doing VP, then you're probably doing Might, which you're going to upgrade Might. Again, I don't think it's going to make a major change in the meta, but I like their thought process. Remove talents that people aren't playing and try out some new stuff. Cassia, huge health buff. 200 increase. That's going to get her closer to where she was before the rework. Pretty significant damage increase and health or attack per second increase, which is going to increase her DPS by even more. Lightning Fury is getting buffed. Avoidance now works while mounted adjusted functionality. After remaining stationary for 0.75 seconds, it's rapidly lost over 0.5 seconds, allowing you to keep it while moving a little bit better. Thunderstroke no longer grants avoidance armor. Quest damage is increased from 1 to 1.5. I believe when I was talking to Ryokai about this, we ran some numbers on it. It shouldn't be viable until that's at 3 outside of ARAM. So I don't expect this talent to still change anything in the meta. Debilitating Thrust now changed to Grounding Rod. New functionality: enemies hit by Lightning Fury or Fend are slowed by 20%. Makes their Fend be a little bit more valuable. And then Martial Law, adjusted functionality: basic attacks against heroes deal 1% max health, as damage is increased to 3% against slowed, stunned, rooted targets, which will be valuable when you've got, especially like the AoE strikes and stuff like that. Genji. I have mentioned a million times, wait, before we even go in here, I've mentioned a million times what they need to do to fix Genji. They need to increase his auto attack damage, his dash damage, and his Q damage, but then reduce his mobility by increasing the cooldown of your trait and increasing the cooldown of your E, making him higher risk and higher reward if you're going to use your E to finish a target off, or if you're going to use your E to dive into their backline and try to get some value. That's going to be much higher risk, but then it also makes him more rewarding to play him at a safer position, like more other ranged assassins. I felt that that would be the best change to him. So let's take a peek at what they've done. Health increased, health regen increased. They've increased the cooldown of his trait, which is what I wanted. Agile dismount, cooldown reduction for his trait is being increased. Augmented guard shield amount is being increased. Cyber Shield's spell armor duration is being increased. X Strike cooldown is being reduced to a 60-second cooldown. Mana cost is being reduced. Double Jump is being removed. New talent, Way of the Shimada. Increases Genji's basic attack range by 1. Each time Genji hits a hero with a basic attack, increases basic attack damage by 1% for 3 seconds, stacking up to 15%. Remember, he attacks in burst, which means that that should stack up relatively quickly. 15% increased damage with his auto attacks is not bad, and having that increased attack range will get him back up to kind of his old DPS. Level 13 for this is a little late, but that is not bad. I mean, that's around the level that you need that sustained damage in those fights. And then finally, Living Weapon cooldown reduction is being reduced to compensate for the fact that they just cut that cooldown by a decent amount. I think this is a step in the right direction to giving him more sustained damage and lasting through. It competes with some decent talents, but nothing too bad. So we'll see how that goes. I'd like to see some more Genjis personally. I think Genji's fun. I used to play him a lot. But at the same time, I feel like if you're going to buff Genji a lot, you need to not do it with his mobility. You need to do it with his damage and nerf his mobility to compensate. And it looks like that's their plan. Gul'dan, Fell Flame. Damage is being increased, which will also, again, effectively increase all of the damage from his Q build if you decide to go that. Cursive Exhaustion, slow, reduced from 50 to 40%. No longer requires him to be hit by corruption. So you pretty much just press your W on someone and they're slowed by 40%. And Dark Bargain, additional respawn time has been reduced from 15 to 10%. Just a talent that most people don't take. I don't think this will make a significant difference in the meta for any of his builds. W build, small nerf. Q build, small nerf. But his main build, E build, isn't really going to get a change. Hanzo, Dragon Strike. Damage is being increased. That's the double dragons. That's not Dragon Arrow. Mounted Archery, additional functionality, reduces the cooldown of Summon Mount by 2 seconds, so you can mount up faster after dropping. So that's going to allow you to use your trait to get mounted, so you could go up and kill a target, and then you can mount up right after you kill that target. Flawless Technique, Stormbow, and basic attack damage bonuses increase. Whoa! This talent was already really powerful in auto attack build and pretty strong in Q build for quickly dropping one person, because all you had to do is an auto attack, Q auto attack, and you could do like the majority of someone's health. So this is actually closing in on a 100 to 0 combo in just simply auto attack, Q auto attack. So that's pretty intense. This will definitely start moving ahead of piercing in a couple builds. Mounted Archery is fun, but I don't know if it'll beat either of the other talents. Raynor, Exterminator. Bonus damage to minions, mercs, and monsters reduced from 75 to 50%. I kind of figured that. It kind of slowly moved ahead of the other talents just because of how valuable it was. Tracer, healing for basic attacks is being reduced. Untouchable no longer increases Tracer's blink range. A new functionality, after using blink, Tracer's movement speed is increased by 2 seconds. That's pretty good. Tyla Frag, cooldown reduction on recall increased from 1.875 to 0.25 seconds. Overall, I think this is going to bring her a little closer to where she should be as far as this. This should also fix the bug that was going on as well. But I do think this will close her a little bit closer into where you want to be on Tracer. Zagara. Zagara has Jagged Barbs. The auto attack range bonus is being increased from 10 to 20%. Again, that's competing with Corrosive Saliva, so that's just not happening. And then the bugs that have been fixed. Watching replays from previous versions will no longer crash the client. Thank you. Chromie, Sandblast references, Deathwing. I'm just double checking. Bullet Spray's range has been increased on the tooltip, and Dragon Knight Savage no longer interrupts missile movers of the target that are unstoppable. Okay. Sentinel's Warning Splat for this matches its search. Okay, cool. Pretty cool bug fixes. This was quite a balanced patch. Overall, I think that there are some significant changes that will adjust the meta. But what do you guys think? What are you most excited about? What do you think has been the biggest thing? Do you think we should have seen more from tanks or Zool or anything like that? Because I personally think that we didn't see enough from tanks, but I think all the rest of the changes were pretty good. I'm excited to try out Genji's new level 13 talent. I think that'll be pretty strong. I don't know how strong. 15% increased damage is not that great, but the extra range is nice, and it just gives you some more sustained ability. The other talents are interesting, but overall, I definitely am interested in trying out some of this new stuff. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Sorry it was a longer video, but there was a lot to cover on this one. So thank you guys, and feel free to check out any of my other videos.